Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to help you get a handle on complex topics by, well, digging into the source material.
That's right, we sift through it so you don't have to.
And today, we're looking at a really core document for anyone interested in patents. The Manual of Patent Examining Procedure. You'll often hear it called the MPEP.
Yeah, the MPEP specifically, we're zeroing in on Chapter 2100, which covers patentability. And within that, we're focusing sharply on Section 2141.
Section 2141. So what's the big deal with that section?
Well, it's essentially the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office's internal playbook. It tells examiners how to figure out if an invention is obvious. Obviousness is a major reason patents get rejected.
Obvious meaning.
Yeah.
Like anyone could have thought of it.
Sort of. It means that even if the invention is new, it might not be inventive enough. It might be a combination or variation of existing things that someone with, ordinary skill in that specific technical field would have found predictable or straightforward to do at the time.
Got it. So it's about preventing patents on things that aren't really a significant leap forward. And this section, 2141, it's based on some important legal ideas, right?
Absolutely. The big one is a Supreme Court case called KSR versus Teleflex. KSR really shifted things. It pushed for a more flexible, common sense evaluation of obviousness.
More common sense, less rigid rules.
Exactly. Before KSR, there was often a stricter requirement to find an explicit suggestion in the prior art, like a paper or another patent saying, hey, combine these things. KSR broadened that.
Okay, interesting. And I think you mentioned another case, Graham.
Right. Graham versus John Deere. That's an older, but still fundamental Supreme Court case. Section 2141 builds heavily on the framework set out in Graham. It's all about a fact-based analysis.
Facts, not just opinions. So our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack these core ideas from Section 2141. We want you to understand how examiners look at an invention and decide if it clears the obviousness hurdle.
Precisely. And just to note, this is part of a larger educational series trying to make the MPEP a bit less intimidating and more accessible.
A worthy goal. Okay, let's start with that Graham v. John Deere framework. You said it's fact-based. What are the key facts examiners need to find?
So Graham lays out three main factual inquiries. First, determine the scope and content of the prior art.
Prior art being everything that was known before the invention. Patents, articles, public use.
Yep, all of that. Anything publicly available in the relevant field. Second, identify the differences between the invention someone is trying to patent and that prior art. What's actually new?
Okay, scope of prior art differences.
Okay.
What's the third?
The third is assessing the level of ordinary skill in the pertinent art. Basically, what would a typical engineer, scientist, or designer in that specific field know and be able to do?
So you're comparing the invention to what came before through the eyes of a standard practitioner in that area. Makes sense.
It's a structured way to approach it. And when we talk about weighing prior art, examiners aren't just looking at patents about the exact same widget.
Ah, so they can pull information from related areas?
Definitely. Prior art from different fields can absolutely be relevant if it addresses a similar problem or uses a similar principle. You might have technology from, say, aerospace that could be relevant to automotive design if the underlying concept applies.
Right, so the knowledge base can be quite broad.
It can. And here's a really crucial point from Section 2141, building on KSR. Finding an invention obvious doesn't necessarily require finding a single prior art document that explicitly suggests making the invention.
Okay, hold on. So they don't need that smoking gun reference that says combine A and B?
Not always. The examiner can piece things together using what's called a reasoned explanation.
A reasoned explanation. Tell me more about that.
It means the examiner needs to articulate a logical reason why someone with ordinary skill in the art would have been motivated to combine known elements or modify existing technology to arrive at the claimed invention, and why they would have had a reasonable expectation of success.
So it's about connecting the dots based on the knowledge and trends in the field at the time.
Exactly. The MPEP gives an example. Imagine there's a known technique used to improve, let's say, efficiency in one type of engine. Applying that same known technique to a similar known type of engine might be considered obvious.
Unless there's some reason it wouldn't be straightforward.
Precisely. Unless applying it to the second engine involved overcoming some unexpected barrier or produced a surprising result or, somehow beyond the normal skill set of someone in that field. If it's just applying a known tool to a known problem in a predictable way, that leans towards obviousness.
That helps clarify it. It's about predictability and standard practice.
Right. And sometimes the rationale isn't purely technical. The MPEP mentions that market forces can play a role too.
Market forces. How so?
Well, if there's a well-known problem in the market, or a strong demand for a particular improvement, and there are known ways to address that problem or achieve that improvement, simply implementing one of those known solutions might be seen as obvious. The market itself created the motivation.
Like, everyone wants smaller phones, so engineers predictably work on miniaturizing known components using known methods, that kind of thing.
That's the general idea, yes. The path forward was somewhat clear due to market pressures and available technology.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that the MPEP gives examiners some common lines of reasoning. You said 7 rationales.
Yes, Section 2141 lists 7 non-limiting rationales. These aren't the only ways to find something obvious, but they're very common scenarios examiners encounter. They're like patterns of obviousness.
Can we touch on a few of the most common ones? We don't need all 7 in detail.
Sure, a really big one is simply combining known elements according to known methods to yield predictable results. You take component A, which does function X, combine it with component B, which does function Y, using standard techniques, and you get a device that predictably does X and Y.
So no synergy, no unexpected outcome, just 1 + 1 = 2 using off-the-shelf parts and methods.
Pretty much. Another common one is substituting one known element for another known element to get predictable results. If component A works in a device and component B is known to be an equivalent substitute for A, just swapping B for A is likely obvious.
Like using a different but standard type of plastic for a casing that was already known to work fine with similar plastics.
Exactly. Unless that specific substitution achieved something unexpected or solved a problem others couldn't.
What about that obvious to try idea? That sounds interesting.
Yes. The obvious to try rationale often comes up when there's a recognized problem, and there are a finite number of identified predictable solutions or parameters to explore.
Finite number, like only a few variables to tweak.
Right. Maybe there are only 2 or 3 known materials that could possibly work for a specific application, or a few settings to try on a known machine. If someone just systematically tries those few options and finds one that works, the courts have sometimes said that was obvious to try and therefore not inventive.
So just running through the predictable checklist isn't enough for a patent.
Generally, no. There needs to be more, like overcoming a specific challenge or achieving an unexpected result. It depends heavily on the specific facts, of course.
Which brings us back to the importance of facts and real-world examples. You mentioned the MPE includes references to court cases.
It does. Section 2141 is peppered with citations to decisions from the Supreme Court and, importantly, the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit.
The Federal Circuit, that's the main court for patent appeals, right?
That's the one. So these aren't just abstract guidelines, they're illustrated and supported by actual legal battles over inventions. These cases show how the Graham factors in these various rationales are applied in practice.
So reading those cases give you real context for how obviousness is judged.
Absolutely. They put meat on the bones of the legal standards. You see how claims related to software, chemicals, mechanical devices, all sorts of things have been analyzed for obviousness. It helps examiners, and it helps inventors and attorneys understand the landscape.
It sounds like understanding these cases is almost as important as understanding the rules themselves.
They definitely go hand in hand. They show the nuances and how the principles play out with complex technologies. Making this complex stuff understandable is really the goal of this whole educational series. And it's worth giving a shout out to Mike Shepard, the creative director, who really envisioned making patent law more approachable through projects like this.
A valuable effort indeed. Okay, so let's try to summarize the key takeaways from our dive into MPEP 2141 on obviousness.
Right.
First, it's grounded in a factual analysis, the Graham factors, prior art, differences in skill level. Second, examiners can consider prior art from different fields, and they don't necessarily need an explicit suggestion to combine things.
Right. The reasoned explanation is key.
That reasoned explanation can be based on technical logic, market forces, or common sense in the field. And we touched on some common rationales like combining known elements or obvious substitution.
And the obvious to try scenario.
Exactly. And finally, understanding court cases is vital to see how these principles work in the real world.
That covers the core concepts well. Grasping these guidelines really does give you valuable insight into how the Patent Office evaluates inventions. And just a quick note, as this is for educational purposes, this summary was prepared with AI assistance and isn't legal advice. Always consult the official MPCP or a qualified professional for specific guidance.
Good point. Always important. So here's something to chew on as we wrap up. This whole obviousness doctrine, especially after KSR, tries to strike a balance, right? It aims to incentivize real innovation, but also prevent people from getting monopolies on predictable advancements or things already effectively within the public's grasp.
Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental tension.
So think about how this common sense or flexible approach impacts different fields. Does it affect software differently than pharmaceuticals? What about industries where progress is mostly small, incremental steps versus ones prone to big leaps? It's a crucial balance with real consequences for innovation, something to consider.